reduce audience interpretation down to semiotically representing simply things? In this third omnibus, we will explore how hacking into existing audience perceptions can be a semiotic shortcut to enhance your visual communication. In the following 3 episodes, we will get all phenomenological to understand how understanding your audience's lived experience can aid you. You will get hooked on aesthetic hooks, triggered by semiotic triggers, and ultimately become more aware of your target audience. Welcome to the third omnibus edition from Semiosis 101 Season 4. In this omnibus, I collect the next 3 episodes of Semiosis 101 Season 4 into a single edition. These 3 episodes can be watched back to back in this edition on the subject of simply things, semiotically hacking audience experiences. If you've watched any Semiosis 101 episodes before, then you will already know I am Dave Wood, and I explain Charles Sanders Peirce's semiotic theory of semiosis, sign action, in Design Essential Tips. Season 4's overall semiotic theme is on developing a new semiotic mindset to help enhance how you visually communicate. Semiosis 101 will build your confidence to apply semiotic sign action into your own designs or illustrations to enhance how you visually communicate. Why do you need Semiosis 101? Peirce's semiotic writing and terminology is unfortunately very obtuse. After all, we studied design and illustration and not philosophy, so we need theory centered to creatives' needs. Yes, that is why you need Semiosis 101. So subscribe and let us jump straight into simply things, semiotically hacking audience experiences. As Peirce says, nothing is a semiotic sign until it is interpreted as a sign for something else. So in this 7th episode of Semiosis 101 Season 4, we focus on how you illustrators and designers are in a looping semiotic relationship with your audience. In the previous episode, I summarized how semiosis is triggered when perception moves from dormant to action. Sign action. Your visual aesthetic does not change, it remains the same. Every meaning-bearing element in your visual language remains within plain sight of your target audience, just as it did before being perceived. The semiotically encoded meaning only becomes meaningful to your audience at the mercy of their own perceptual abilities. In this episode, we explore how to apply semiosis in your designs or illustrations to facilitate for these necessary audience perceptual reactions. As creatives, it is important to understand that for an audience to perceive meaning, they draw on their lived experiences as they have lived through their own history of conceptualizations. In other words, how the audience interprets meaning is based on their life world of previous knowledge and experience. Krippendorff states that every conception is somebody's conception. In pragmatism, the pragmatists argue that everyone's future interpretations are based on their own previous understanding. Knowledge is learned whether by personal study or social cultural influences and consensus. By utilising a working hypothesis of what your audience already visually understands provides you with semiotic hacks straight to retaining their attention after triggering their perception. We can call this realisation second order thinking. Pragmatic second order thinking provides you illustrators and designers with a valuable edge to semiotically enhance how you visually communicate. Your audience's life world helps you to form a working hypothesis of what common experiences they all share. This valuable insight can be employed to semiotically hack your visual language during your ideation stages. By utilizing qualities and visual references as a visual shorthand, you can align what you design or illustrate to what your audience can perceive as meaningful. This is just a small change in your existing creative mindset. Semiosis's power is rooted in the audience's existing understanding of something. Consider sci-fi or fantasy worlds. Without our own existing experience of reality, these visions of fantastic worlds would not be imaginable. These flights of fancy that sci-fi and fantasy creators take us on are first built on what we have experience of. Establish that first and the audience will go with the flow. Let me give you a creative example. London-based design agency Hudson Fuggle routinely produces the design work for We Are Waterloo's Waterloo Food Fortnight Festival. We Are Waterloo's 2019, the year before COVID hit, launch party theme was the 1990s. They gave the Hudson Fuggle team an open brief to visually communicate the 1990s to the Waterloo Food Fortnight audience. Any decade is diverse in culture, subcultures, music tastes, food tastes, so the design team began hypothesizing what visual language would trigger recognition of the 1990s theme. Mixtapes, the memory of bootlegging your own music mixes. Hudson Fuggle hypothesized that the general festival audience's lived experience over a certain age was an audio cassette. Music triggers happy personal memories. Add a colour scheme hinting Mr. Blobby and the Waterloo Food Fortnight target audience instantly are back in the 1990s. A working hypothesis, abductive reasoning, allowed the creatives to build meaning-bearing elements which meant something to the target audience. Once perception was hooked, further visual communicated meaning could then be unlocked. By increasing your awareness of the tantalizing insights your audience's lived experiences can provide, you can improve how your aesthetic decisions retain your audience's attention. In season 2 and 3, I covered a lot of this theoretical semiotic grounding, so check out Omnibus 4.3 and 3.3. Lived experience, or a life world, is phenomenological. We all have lived experiences. When I use the term lived experience, it immediately makes you realise your target audience are people and not passive consumers. Yes, individually we all experience life differently. However, collectively we share commonalities of experiences which are socially, culturally contextualised. Peirce's semiosis utilises this phenomenon. Back in season 2, I used an example of how to use a working hypothesis, abductive reasoning, with an example target audience of cinema goers. In this example, I discussed semiotic qualities that would be familiar and provide a subconscious instant trigger to possible perception using cinematic darkness. My hypothesis was that within the contextual life world of cinema goers, they feel comfortable with cinematic darkness. Therefore, a comfortable semiotic hack to gain and retain the audience's attention would be to use a tonal range of darker qualities in the visual language. This simple contextual hack semiotically strengthens the visual language to convey the client's intended concept. Check out Omnibus 2.4 for more on this example and how to develop your existential awareness of working hypotheses. Life worlds and hypotheses provide you with contextual insights to semiotically ideate. Whatever your client's brief needs visually communicating, a small pragmatic change in your creative mindset can have you empathizing more with your audience. My example of cinematic darkness to a cinema-going audience is just an immediate example of a working hypothesis. It is not the final aesthetic design or illustration. The more you learn about your audience's life worlds, the more tailored your ideation can be made to semiotically align with their experiences. Or if you want to read more about this, then check out the Semiosis 101 semiotic resource on Ghost. Link is below in the description. Hypothesis, abductive reasoning, is a logical way of beginning your ideation, so you can then semiotically encode effective meaning-bearing elements. Semiotic science. Hypothesis is the first level of logic, and abductive logic is referred to as the logic of design. Perception is key here. How you perceive crafting your visual language will pay dividends to how your audience perceives what you design or illustrate. This is all within your semiotic control. Without overthinking yourself into ideation inertia, consider that all the raw marks, shapes, colours, etc. you sketch are potentially semiotically meaning-bearing. The qualities you sketch, even at an early thumbnailing stage, should be tailored to other people's perceptions, not your personal tastes. There, I have said it. Once you change your creative mindset, you can sketch using possible qualities that your target audience will be familiar with. These contextual qualities are revealed from the audience's life worlds. From life world insights, you can hypothesize how to enhance your chances of delivering instant audience perception. on their visual terms. Your sketches now are utilising qualisigns. These qualities at the sketched ideation stage will only ever be possible ways to weakly visually communicate the interpretive possibility of the intended concept in how you represent it. Peirce calls the delivery of these semiotic qualities qualisigns, the lowest level a semiotic sign can take. We can think of qualisigns as semiotically ephemeral. Once perception begins, the semiotic quality used to immediately trigger audience attention is spent. Semiosis can now begin to function in interpretive cycles from simple to complex in the mind of the audience. Your semiotically encoded visual language represents the intended concept. Your semiotically encoded visual language aids the audience's interpretation of what they see. With attention subconsciously perceived and retained, your visual language will release more meaning. Gradually, the audience interprets their understanding of what that concept is from how you represent it. You can help your audience to commit their attention to your work by semiotically framing your ideation's initial sketches. By strengthening your visual language with familiar qualities, you can semiotically trigger instant possibilities for meaning in the mind of your audience. With that triggering of perception, the quali-sign's instant delivery evaporates and semiotic mediation of meaning begins in the form of a sin sign, a sin, gil, hit of contextual meaning. In the next episode, I will discuss how to visually communicate deeper meaning by employing mediated semiotic sign action in your illustrations or designs. Remember to subscribe to Semiosis 101 on YouTube to be notified when this next free episode is published, or become a Semiosis 101 producer on Patreon and watch all future episodes months ahead of YouTube, plus other exclusive Patreon-only video content. Hint, hint. I just design or illustrate. What is all this talk about action and reaction? Some of you may be shouting at me. I am an advocate for the position taken by design professor Jorge Frascara that visual communication design is ultimately the facilitation of behavioural change. What now? Action, reaction, and now behavioural change facilitation? In this 8th episode of Semiosis 101's Season 4, what am I on about now? What we design or illustrate is not passive. We visually facilitate actions and reactions both subconsciously, consciously, and physically. Let us now delve into the effect of our creative work to explore the semiotic sign action for reaction. Let us now see how your visual language can semiotically facilitate effective visual communication. Let us focus on how pragmatic semiotics is actionable by the audience's interpretation. Hooking audience attention is one thing, but now I am focused on the effect of perceiving and interpreting what they see. As visual communicators, illustrators and designers' work bears meaning. This has some effect on the audience who perceive the work. To see, to perceive, and to interpret is the desired effect we want on our target audience. Your audience is not passive in this, as the visual language you use in your designs or illustrations facilitates some reaction. Frascara argues that from this reaction, your audience acts and your work impacts their behaviour. With a more focused semiotic frame of mind, you can use semiosis as an applied semiotic framework to craft your visual language to deliver the desired action. Each semiotic sign action is powered by mindfully crafting for perception, communication, and delivery. In the last few episodes, we have explored how meaning can be semiotically encoded from simple qualities upwards in sign action complexity. We have now seen how the logic of design, deductive reasoning, can provide a working hypothesis of what our target audience will find visually familiar. These audience insights suggest qualities that can be semiotically hacked to provide authentic, familiar qualities which can provide possible visual clues to hook their attention. The instant perceptual triggering of audience interpretation is what Peirce describes as a qualisign. Once perceived as meaning-bearing, visual elements can begin to mediate deeper meaning from the visual language. The familiarity of mere semiotic qualities, now with prolonged audience attention, can facilitate them to connect the qualities with existing things they already know. Within plain sight, the same visuals can now suggest. This facilitation of mediated suggestions of existent things can only happen with the retention of audience attention within what we have designed or illustrated. We have semiotically and perceptually now moved our audience from instant delivery of possible meanings to suggested connections to things they have experience of. Peirce calls this mediation of meaning a synth sign. The weak quality of a quali sign now delivers single hits of possible meaning. Synth sign as in single and not transgression. With audience attention retained, the sign action can now subconsciously mediate the audience to draw on their own lived experiences. These lived experiences help them to interpret possible perceptions into suggested meaning. These deeper interpretations lead the audience to your client's intended concept as they draw on their previous knowledge base to understand what you are trying to visually communicate. From our aesthetic work, we want our target audience to act on the intended meaning we encode. Whether that is read this, do that, look at this, turn that page, etc. Otherwise, any designer's or illustrator's aesthetic lies semiotically dormant, remaining at a denotational level. Let us go beyond denotational meanings. With semiosis, you encode semiotic triggers into your visual language to initially hook perception of possible meaning. Then your semiotically encoded aesthetic can facilitate the desired suggestion of deeper meaning. You may call this subtle visual layering of meaning as tone of voice to resolve in the audience that this visually means that. Let us use a perception example. A is for apple, but an image of an apple can convey other meanings such as a brand, a large American city, poisoning, original sin, etc. So if an apple means something other than apple, does that mean it is working semiotically? Yup, you instinctively do this. As soon as you use apple to mean more than apple, then you are working semiotically. You need to ensure that your audience can interpret what you intend them to. If the concept you wish to visually communicate is a brand, then your visual language has to be on brand. Your audience needs to understand that in this context, when they see this representation of an apple, they will interpret the concept of apple as a brand. If the concept of apple is about theology, fairy tale poisoning, or a city, then semiotically your visual language needs to facilitate that interpretation. In semiotic sign action, representation choices needs to first trigger and retain your audience's perception. Careful crafting of semiotic sign action in your aesthetic decisions will facilitate audience perception from possible to suggested and ultimately to resolved interpretations of meaning. How your visual language can facilitate perception begins with familiar qualities. Then it mediates in the mind of the audience representations to a point where the visual language becomes proxy for the intended concept. Well, if you want to read more about this, then check out the Semiosis 101 semiotic resource on Ghost. Link is below in the description. So how, in our Apple example, would the audience know which possible meaning to perceive and interpret? Context is obviously key, to a degree. However, context infers shared knowledge to know the social rules of meaning. Context also requires audience lived experiences to set those social rules. Remember, Peirce's semiotics is pragmatic. Pragmatism, according to William James, one of its three founders, is from the Greek and means action. John Dewey, the third founder, describes pragmatism as a philosophy which regards the world as being in continuous formation. Louis Menand's thesis on the common pragmatist attitude is that ideas are social provisional responses to particular situations and survive on adaptability. This is crucial to your semiotic mindset recalibration. Ideas are social. Ideas are situational. Ideas are adaptable. Yes, within a pragmatic context, the social, situational, and adaptable nature of ideas plays both ways. During your ideation, you creators develop ideas to represent and convey the intended concept in the client's brief. However, those ideas can be interpreted differently by your target audience in ways you may not expect. So how can you ensure that you successfully visually communicate? Semiosis is semiotic sign action. The emphasis is on action. The act of interpretation by your audience is action. Your aesthetic decisions for representing the concept within your crafted visual language is action. The crucial triggering, therefore, is to ensure what the audience sees leads them to perceive deeper meaning beyond the visual denotational level. Without the audience, what meaning you design or illustrate into your work will remain passive and dormant. So far this episode, I have covered the perceptual semiotic shift from the dormant to interpretable. I then framed the semiotic delivery from possible familiar qualities to suggested existent things. I will not semiotically go any further at this point, as it is important to take stock of where we are. Let us return to our Apple example. Our audience are perceptually primed. How are our target audience already perceptually primed? Well, in the example, audiences for Apple, they are either shopping for tech or interested in theology or travel, or the audience has murderous intent. Before you say it, yes, a techie religious person with a love of fairy tales can go to New York. However, in our Apple example, how the apple is visually communicated will affect how it is interpreted. The representation of apple is no longer just an apple. By manipulating the semiotic sign action at the iconic representation level of familiar qualities, deeper levels of perception and interpretation are actions. Next, we will focus on audience imagination and how that can be harnessed to aid deeper meaning to be visually communicated. Subscribe on YouTube or become a Semiosis 101 producer on Patreon. In this 9th episode of Semiosis 101 Season 4, we focus on how familiar visual elements, semiotic signs to you and me, can be semiotically hacked to trigger audience imagination. With familiar qualities offering possible deeper meaning, audience imagination then moves any meaning bearing it from a dormant perception state to different levels of interpreted meaning. One moment it is meaningless, then instantaneously it is meaning something more. It, after being perceived whatever it is, begins to mediate its deeper meaning to the target audience. Semiotically, it has an effect on the perceiving audience's imagination. If the audience can imagine that it has more than a denotative meaning, then semiotic sign action has begun. In this conundrum, it is in plain sight to your audience as a visual element and perceptually dormant until imagined as meaning-bearing. When I say imagined as meaning-bearing, this is a pragmatic effect on the mind of the audience. Charles Sanders Peirce's semiosis is a pragmatic semiotic theory. Through this philosophical pragmatic lens, ideas are perceived as social, situational, and adaptive. Klaus Krippendorff, in his design book A Semantic Term, whether he intended to or not, frames perception in pragmatic terms. He states that people cannot help but perceive their world through the vocabularies they use. Let us look at this in more depth, but use imagine rather than perceive. In the previous episodes, I have been discussing the importance to you creatives of your target audience's lived experiences, life worlds. It is from these experiences that the audience makes new interpretations when encountering new visual stimuli. They will use words they already know to understand new things. The audience will think of these new things in terms they already understand. This previous understanding is socio-culturally situated. It is formed from knowledge the audience has previously learned and experienced. They interpret what is newly visually presented based on what they already understand. This is why I use the phenomenological term life world for this lived experience. Semiosis as a pragmatic semiotic theory is an applied process of moving the audience to new understanding from previous understanding. Semiotic sign action facilitates the audience to imagine possible meaning bearing from what is visualized. Your target audience are all individuals with individual experiences. Collectively, they will share some lived experiences within specific contexts. A life world. Life worlds provide insights to how to successfully visually communicate to them. You only need to be concerned with this collective and contextual life world. We seldom design or illustrate for individuals, so let us focus our attention on semiotically hacking a life world. What can your intended audience collectively imagine from your visual language? Why would we want to semiotically hack imagination? Remember, pragmatically, ideas are socially situated and adaptable. This means that by understanding what the target audience's socially situated expectations are, you can gain insight to what they can imagine. Interpretation. To frame your visual language around. Representation. To visually communicate the intended messages your client needs. Concept. Your understanding of your target audience's life worlds can avoid miscommunication. After all, science fiction relies on what is currently understood in the present to imagine possible futures. I have just reversed the semiotic determination flow. Interpretation depends on representation. Representation conveys the concept. In this way, I center your audience. Our use of visual language has to begin by taking the target audience to new understanding from what they are possibly already familiar with. This is why understanding life worlds is crucial to your creative ideation. That is why the weakest semiotic sign is possible, familiar, instant. The perceptual switch from semiotically dormant to meaning-bearing begins with instant imagination. The audience can imagine other possible meanings from what they see beyond the denotative. Semiotic sign action is triggered by the manipulation of a socially situated familiarity the audience can immediately understand. Let me give you a quick example. We see a visual of an apple with a bite out of it. In one socially situated context, this apple representation could interpret an intended concept of a tech brand. Represented in a different way, a fairy tale trope. The concept of a tech company is semiotically represented by an apple with a bite out of it using specific on-brand visual language. The audience in this socially situated context interprets tech company. The concept of poisoning of a fairy tale princess by a wicked stepmother uses a different form of visual language elements in semiotically representing apple. This audience in this socially situated context interprets a fairy tale. In one situated context, the apple is imagined as a tech company, and in the other situated context, the apple is imagined as a device to get rid of a rival by poisoning. Ultimately, it is just a representation using semiotic qualities that forms a familiar apple shape. Both apple representations still have to be experienced and learned that one is a brand and one is poison. The audience's imagination is utilised to get them to interpret the intended concept that the representation intends. Both examples begin from the hypothesis that the target audience has experience of a particular fruit. Without this grounding, it would not matter whether the apple was so aesthetically beautifully drawn. If the audience had never had experience of an existing thing as an apple, they would find it difficult interpreting apple from what they see. The closest the audience could interpret may only be fruit. Not so damaging for a fairy tale, but devastating for a tech brand. Or if you want to read more about this, then check out the Semiosis 101 semiotic resource on Ghost. Link is below in the description. Therefore, the visual language you craft to visually communicate your concept needs careful consideration. At the beginning of this episode, I used the catch-all phrase, it, for whatever we design or illustrate. It could easily mean the whole illustration or design, or parts with it. You just substitute whatever you want for it. I already have. I have used apple instead of it. We have seen that apple could be used to connote many different concepts. The only difference being the target audience and what is intended to be visually communicated. In semiotic terms, the concept to be interpreted from its representation. The visual language needed to imagine a brand will be different to a fairy tale's needs. It is more than personal taste at work here in selecting the appropriate visual language for an apple. The audience needs to be factored in. How will their imagination help? A child will need different visual language than adults needing to buy tech, but the visual language for theology may have crossovers with fairy tale representations of an apple. The visual language to represent a city will need to be different again. If you are instantly successful, the familiar shape of an apple can possibly be interpreted from this representation. It is at the next mediated semiotic power level that the audience is happy that an existent thing called an apple is the correct interpretation. But now this apple suggests some other meaning than just fruit. To be technical here, once an audience has interpreted apple as meaning more than apple, then their perceptual awareness has moved from a state of firstness to secondness. Once in this state, the audience's attention is retained. The state of firstness is triggered as soon as perception of meaning begins. Mediation to the intended encoded meaning happens after imagination is triggered. With audience imagination in a perceptual state of secondness, the audience can be semiotically suggestible to deeper meanings. Full interpretation of the representation of the concept is only achievable if the audience can reach a state of thirdness and resolve this means that now. Meaning emerges first from the imagination of the beholder. We will focus in the next Semiosis 101 episode on resolving this mediated release of deeper meaning through our visual language semiotic decisions. Remember and subscribe to be notified when this episode is published, or become a Semiosis 101 producer on Patreon and watch all future episodes months ahead of YouTube, plus other exclusive Patreon content and gifts. See you all again for the next Semiosis 101 episode. Semiosis 101 is unique in helping illustrators and designers to semiotically enhance your visual communication skills. One designer-centric semiotic video at a time. Remember to hit subscribe to be notified when the next episode hits.